Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Data Dialogues. Data Dialogues is where we get industry leaders and talk about some of the most pressing topics in data. Today, I am super excited to welcome Boris Jabez, CEO of Census, onto the show. Boris, thank you so much for spending your time with us.
Thanks for having me, Tarush. I'm very excited.
Um, so much to talk about. Very interested in what Census is doing. Would love to sort of start with a very sort of basic, obvious question. So many different categories inside the formerly known as the modern data stack
Mm.
space. What is the reverse ETL category? How did it get its name, and why does Census deserve to be building inside that category?
Mm. Yeah, there's a lot of jargon in tech, right? I think humans need placeholder names for things because it makes it easier to reason about the complex kind of technology that we have to put together. Uh, so let me start at the beginning, at least. So Census, we started it over 5 years ago now. So it was roughly, I think we started working on our first prototype in August of 2018. And there was no name for these things. We weren't talking about the modern data stack. We weren't talking about reverse ETL. ETL was definitely a word. It goes back decades. But all we wanted to do was create a single source of truth that a business could depend on to run all sorts of business activities, sales, marketing, support. It was frustrating for us coming from all sorts of companies that we had been in to have people not on the same page, right? To have marketing not know what's going on in the product, to have salespeople not understand what users are doing in a trial. There's just so much data that was in, to use a fancy word, like in silos. And we found that frustrating personally. And so we set about to try to fix that. And so if you're going to fix that, what do you need? You need to have the data somewhere, and you need it federated to everywhere where action and activity and automation and users are going to be, right? Because we live in a time and a place where people have their own pane of glass, right? People sit in front of their own software. They're not all logging into the exact same app everywhere. And so, okay, so you need somewhere for the data to sit, and you need a way to get it to everyone. And so we did something just to start, which is we connected to our first user, our first customers, Redshift, which was more popular at the time than Snowflake. And we said, let's connect the data in Redshift to your Salesforce. And this was what you call today, again, more jargon, right? They're known as a product led company. It just means a good company. It's a good software company. They were called Figma. Most people have heard of it by now. And their sales team wanted to understand what users were doing in their application. And so all of that knowledge about what a user was doing was not in Salesforce, right? It was sitting in their analytics. And so we just built a connector between those two things. And the reason we liked this, that it wasn't just a prototype for us, but it was something that we could build on, was we recognized that this data lake, data warehouse, whatever you want to call it, had a really good solution for what I would call infinite storage. They're really, really good at giving you unlimited capacity to store knowledge about users or anything you want, widgets. And so that forms a really good basis, right? Because what do you need? I said you need two things. You need a source for the data, and then you need to be able to federate it, the same version of it everywhere. And so we're like, if we can just use this as a source, which was weird at the time. It's hard to remember. I know it's only 5 years ago, but using a data warehouse as a source for other things was very unusual. A lot of our early customers were very confused by this piece of technology. And so they didn't have a name for it. We didn't have a name for it. We really just talked about it as like, it's a connector from Redshift to Salesforce.
Yeah.
And so people needed a name, right? You just, as the first couple of users became the first, 10 users, you needed a name. And we didn't know how to name it. Turns out I am not a marketing naming guru. The name of the company is really just tied to the idea of having one version of the truth, right? That's why we called the company Census.
Yeah.
And And people just started referring to it as 5 tran in reverse,
Yeah.
because that at least mathematically made sense. Where it's like, oh, it's going out of the warehouse. Uh, and this is when the modern data stack concept was starting to emerge as a word, as a set of words. And so then
Yeah.
people were like, well, I need a more generic name. And so people are saying, well, let's just call it reverse ETL. And then it just took off, right, as a name. It's not even perfectly correct, right? ETL is directionless, so ETL in reverse is kind of a meaningless concept. But who
Yeah.
cares? It
Yeah.
actually just means taking data that you have, specifically analytics data and all the kind of accumulated data you have, and putting it into action, putting it into the last mile, into the place where work gets done. And that's all we wanted to solve. That's all we ever wanted. So in terms
Yeah.
of like, why does Census have a right to play in this category? It's just the thing we want to do for our users. That's all we want. We want companies to be on the same page about their customer and target them well and work with them well. The way I explained it to my parents, they were very confused, right? When you start a company like this, they don't know what databases are, they don't know what CRM is, they don't know what all these things are. And I just told an example that everyone has experienced, including my parents, which is they've called their, cell phone companies support line. And why
Yeah.
they seem to have to identify themselves like 3 times on the call. And they seem to not know anything
Yeah.
about the last time they called. And it's because these are disparate
Yeah.
databases, right? That's the actual reason. These things are all just stored in different places and people are looking them up and opening up tabs on their computer while they're talking to my parents. And this is really frustrating as a consumer. It's like, you can do better. The information is
Yeah.
there. And that's all that we're trying to do. And I think in that process, you put the analytics into a much more leveraged position. Instead of analyzing what's going on in the business, you're actually taking action in the business. You're automating the business. You're improving the feedback loop of your business, which is the whole point, right? That then you can grow and you can provide a better service.
This
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense, right? I think the last 5 to 7 years inside the data warehouse, sort of specifically, world have been really focused on sort of data teams, right? Like giving the tooling for data teams to build dashboards, to build models, to really enable other parts of the business with tools for themselves. And I think the evolution of that in some ways is to, give the business more tools to basically go make sense of this. So I love the example you gave about calling your cell phone company and them not being able to, make the most sort of to sort of build the best experience for their users. Who do you see as really the day-to-day users of a platform like Census? Is it still the data teams, or is this, simple enough now which you could sort of give this to a marketer or a finance person or a customer support person and have them build these sort of reverse
Yeah.
integrations?
That's I think I've watched that evolution. I think when we started, the infrastructure that this is built on was very much in the control of a data team. And the fact is, whether you're at a startup or a big company, data teams can simply not scale to serve every request from every part of the company, which is a good problem to have, right? It's like a good product usually has a backlog of feature requests that are greater than what they can serve their customers. And so there's a natural tendency as you deploy a solution like this, you might start with Census as having the data team in control and setting it up. But we've built a lot in the product, and our kind of customers have evolved over time to let a marketing team or a growth team or an operations team come in and self-serve. And it doesn't mean
Yeah.
they're necessarily cleaning the data themselves and building models and doing data science, but more they are more able to decide where they want to put this into action in a way that is safe. And that's a lot of the value in our connector technology. It's actually that moving data is hard enough, to be clear, and doing that well with 200 connectors is difficult. But helping you avoid mistakes in writing data into your email marketing tool that's going to accidentally generate like a million emails. This is a lot of the value we provide that allows therefore a marketer to come in and say, well, I just want an audience of, people who who spent more than this amount of money and on Black Friday, and that's the I want to create a cohort around that, right? And I think we're now entering that stage where the infrastructure is going to start to disappear, right? We're going to stop talking about the modern data stack and data bricks and complex infrastructure and reverse ETL. It will simply be, I have data, I have knowledge about my customers, I have analytics, and I have models that I've built, but they're really all in service of action and growth, which is what the point is. You know, infrastructure is not valuable for its own sake. It has to be. It's an investment you have to leverage, and I think that's a lot of what Census is. It's really just giving you leverage. So it helps the data
Yeah.
team write a model once and have many people take advantage of it.
And so it makes sense. We had sort of CDP, and CDP was the old way of doing things, where
Mm,
sort of CDP fundamentally became its own data store.
right.
And with the advent of the warehouse, we've sort of broken this down into parts. But where we are today is we have 10 core different categories, which a lot of businesses are have to sort of engage with, and that means managing 10 different relationships. And that's obviously one of the big reasons which sort of 5x exists, is
Yeah,
we
it's
can
great.
give you a sort of modular platform. um, but we're also, a lot of people are talking about consolidation, right? Like, and what that really means is, as some of these sort of categories um, are under pressure to, do more with less, that there is, you know sort of genuine thought that would someone like a Fivetran do an element of activating this data? Would someone like sort of DBT sort of explore what this looks like? What do you really, what are your thoughts on some of the consolidation in this space, as we move from 10 different categories to potentially people are trying to map this out on what does five really exist? Does that make sense?
I mean, it's an interesting question. I think people who like it's fun whenever you're at the cafe and you want to comment on all these things. We're gonna. It's a natural question to ask ourselves, and the industry and all industries have this journey of bundling and unbundling and consolidation and fragmentation. So of course it's an eternal question. Uh, and to be fair, there's been consolidated products long before DBT or Fivetran or Census, right? So take an Informatica. That's a product that does all these things in a consolidated experience. It's a single thing you buy, but people choose the modern data stack. And so I think the question is less about, do you want to buy one tool, versus do you want to have a great experience as a user, as a customer, and as a vendor, me building it. If consolidation allows me to build a better experience, then I think it's intriguing. So, um, you know, you can think of it as, if Fivetran had connectors that went in reverse, would that make the experience of using Fivetran better? And I don't think it would. I think it's just would be more connectors on a single page. But if you think about the user, right? Fivetran has a user that is all about bringing data in for analysis. Census has a user whose desire is actually to activate, to take action, to affect change in like an email tool, which has a whole different set of kind of concerns. There's an end user that will come in and do like segmentation in a point and click way, right? So they're writing like a no code SQL thing. Uh, these are very different users, very different use cases. And so just saying you have one tool is actually not, I think, better unless you can deliver a better user experience. And so I'm all for consolidation, if it means the customer gets something better. And if
Yeah.
all they want is a singular billing relationship, well, they can work with 5x, right?
That makes a lot of sense, and I also see the difference in persona, where Fivetran is really going after, again, more of the data team users, because the data is moving from source system, it's moving into a warehouse, it needs to be structured, it needs to be joined. Whereas Census, as you mentioned, you're building a lot of tools for your marketers, for your finance team, for your
Yeah.
ops teams. So
Or
that
let's take a
probably.
different set of tools, right? Something a little bit outside of our of our corner of the data world. So again, Informatica has lineage tooling built in. It has modeling tooling built in. It has ETL built in, right? All these things completely built in on their own
Yeah.
proprietary language. And yet, when's the last time you met someone in a data team who preferred using that over DBT and open lineage tools, right?
I was saying, I don't think I've ever met someone who likes working in Informatica. I just, the
Right.
people who were buying Informatica were not the people who were using it.
So I think like that's all you need to know, right? It's consolidation is good if it means a better product experience. I think
Yeah.
when Apple used to buy chips from someone else and then they consolidated, right? They purchased their own chip design company many years ago because they wanted to build better chips tied to their software, and they did. So it's not just that they said, well, I want to own the chip so that I can make more money. It was, I want to own the chip so I can make it specifically for our software, and the customer benefits from that,
Yeah.
you know?
That makes a ton of sense. Um, so, who is the ideal customer for Census? This type of customer should be buying Census, and who is it not meant for?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I think we're both ambitious people, so I want it to be for everyone, but that's obviously someday in the future. Um, Look, there's some baselines, right? You should be on some form of data platform that we connect to, that we work with. Now we work with like 25 different ones today. Uh, I think the more important thing is that you have to be at a place where you want to use your data as a growth mechanism, right? You don't just want to do financial analysis. I think there's a stage where you hire a data team at a lot of companies, and their job, especially a BI team, is board metrics, right? It's just show me how much money we made, show me how many customers we have. It's purely around aggregate data, which is important.
Yep.
Obviously, you need to know. You need to know how much you grew last month, right? It's very important to have let's call it a decent accounting function. Uh, and if that's all you're at, the stage that you're at, then I think Census is not yet for you. But to me, that's a terrible waste of the infrastructure. So if you're ready, I think to do more with your data, to use it to drive campaigns, to use it to accelerate, a sales process, to improve the quality of your support, right? There's all these end use cases that all the teams dependent on data, like are downstream from data, could use. So if there's something like that, and the data team is sufficiently sophisticated or has done enough work to get like a basic amount of infrastructure in place, then I think you're ready to use something like Census. So
Yeah.
I think it's like once you're ready to go from aggregate metric reporting to understanding an individual customer, an individual user, and then doing something with that, that's when it's time for you to deploy the data.
Makes sense. And just to like map this one level further, right? Like,
Yeah,
a lot of companies like a sort of a lot of listeners like looking for like certain attributes, right? Like, is it possible to break this down into, if you are an X to X person size company with a data team of this size, what are you seeing in the market? Who is it really working
sure.
for?
Yeah, I think our our core user, right, has a certain amount of scale. We really optimized our product for people that are trying to grow their company, but that are starting from a fairly large user base. So I'm talking about millions of users, if not tens of millions of users, if not hundreds of millions of users.
Yeah.
And a lot of our platform is designed around that, right? The throughput of our connectors is really optimized for that, rather than going really fast on a small number of things. We're optimized for going really fast on a big number of things, which is just very different. So, one of the companies that we talk about publicly that's on our website is a company called Canva. Canva has hundreds of millions of users, and when you're at that scale, you cannot grow by doing the manual thing. You can grow your brand, of course, and I don't know how to do that, and it's really fascinating. But everything outside of that, you have to use science. You cannot grow by just trying things at random. You have to have a real data team focused on helping marketing run growth. So that involves having control groups, running experiments, and all of that is a deep integration between the data team and the marketing team, and a deep integration between the data and the kind of campaigns. And so that's probably the people who most benefit with using something like Census. That's where you get the most value, and then you can demonstrate that to the executive team that, look, we installed this thing, this obscure name, right? Reverse ETL. But what we got for it is growth. What we got for it is going from, you know, this year when we ran our let's call it take it as, we just came out of Black Friday in the United States, right? We came out of we did our Black Friday campaigns, and we did them in this way that was split across 12 cohorts, and we could test various things, and we got much better lift. And like, that's the value of connecting data in a loop from the source to the action. And then you can
Yeah.
move it to do more things, right? Then you get a win, and then your management will let you do more with it, and kind of expand your sphere of control and push the data. Because remember, the goal for Census is very selfish, right? I'm trying to make one version of the truth at your company, which means I want the data team to build a singular model or a singular set of models that are used everywhere, whether it's finance, sales, marketing, support, product, right? This is a very ambitious thing, and most people don't want to have like a singular team kind of dependent for that. And so you got to earn your ability to do that as a team.
So there's sort of one use case which I've always wondered, right? And
Hmm.
so this makes a lot of sense when you have data in the warehouse, and sort of data in the warehouse today is, is sort of fairly optimized. And we work with these concepts of like micro batches, where,
Yes.
ingestion tools today support 5-minute ingestion time. What happens when you have, more real-time use cases, when you have sort of transactional data, which you want to use in use cases like, an event just sort of came in, and I want to
Yeah.
action this event in the warehouse. How does that really work inside a platform like Census today?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and something we've been spending a lot of time on in the last few months, uh, because there is a kind of impermeable barrier between batching, micro batching, and then true, let's call it, sub-second real-time latency.
Yeah.
And you can't use the same techniques for all of these. So I think for a long time, from a because our technology was really scoped to the micro batch, and data warehouses were scoped to that as well, we just didn't work for any use case where you needed really low latency. I actually would have to tell you to go elsewhere and work outside of Census, which is frustrating, right? Because again, the goal of the company is to have one source of truth, right? And I don't want you to have two different paths for the information, because then there will be skew, and it'll be hard to connect the two. And what if you want to send a different email based on the user having this propensity versus that propensity, right? So you want to be able to connect thinking, kind of what I would call thinking fast and slow. You want to be able to take all the data that you've generated and understood about a user, and take advantage of that in the path of the kind of real time event, right? When someone's like, I just failed to make a deposit in my app, right? And you need to react to that without waiting. So for those things, we have actually been spending a lot of time in our platform, really building or rebuilding a whole segment of it from scratch to work at that latency. And so you have to change Census, and we have to work with entirely new systems. So, we just really, as we're talking, this is very fresh, but we've been working on it for months. Uh, like, announced support for Kafka and real time streams in Census, and that's like the lower level technology, right? But the goal is to say, as a user, you want to be able to activate both the kind of state that you have. You want to put that state into action, right? So you want to say, I have this list of 100 million users with these attributes, and I want those attributes everywhere. So Census does that really well already. And so that's very much an optimization around throughput rather than latency. But then
Yeah.
in addition, there are things that happen, right? There are things that happen, like I failed a deposit, or I'm in the midst of a game, and you want to notify me about something, and you want to do something different depending on the kind of user that I am. It's especially that when you want to make different decisions, whether that's a control group for an experiment, or because you might have a VIP user from a normal user, or if you're in retail, you might have someone who's a kind of a repeat buyer versus a first time buyer, and you want to differentiate how you kind of action on the event. And the events can be of any kind, right? They just landed in San Francisco, and I want to make them an offer that is tied to their location. All of that you want to be able to pass through a system like Census, but activate with that knowledge, with that extra information that's sitting in your data platform. So our job is to make that disappear. I will say this is actually a tremendous amount of engineering under the covers, but the end
Yeah.
result should be that you can just take action on that event with the knowledge that's sitting in the warehouse.
Yeah.
And I think you're going to see over the next, by the way, 2-3 years, Tarush, I think we're very much in the early days. You're going to see a lot more of the traditional platforms start to adapt towards this. So if you look at whether that's Databricks and Delta tables, or Snowflake and dynamic tables, which are still like early days, like they're not that low latency. But then you look at a
Yeah.
platform like Materialize, which is very, very low latency. I think there's a whole bunch of use cases where this becomes very, very powerful. And
Yeah.
again, our goal is that you should not have to think about that as a business user, right? That's like implementation detail, but us
Yeah.
in the data stack, we know, right?
And so, what I hear is that, supporting Kafka and sort of things like Kafka streams will make it very, very easy to push real-time data into Census, and just given the low latency of the platform, you'll be able to action these in near real time, which is really exciting.
Yeah,
Would
yeah.
what are your thoughts on going even one level further and, potentially giving customers SDKs, like the segments and the sort of Rudder stacks of the world, in which you can fire events directly from these SDKs without even having to worry about the intermediate sort of build your
Totally,
own
totally.
event
I
stream.
think that's a great idea. I think of it as, I think when I try to think about how we would design products, one core philosophy that emerged for us ever since we started was, I never really want to create another data silo for you, right? The beauty of leveraging people's existing data lake and data warehouse is you're using the infrastructure you have, which is great both from a, let's not charge you for extra storage, but also great from a governance and kind of the secular trend towards privacy. All these things are really good. And so the first thing I want to do is allow people to connect to their existing event streams and existing infrastructure. But it is very reasonable for us to add, and stay tuned, right? To add the ability to post events to Census, right? Whether they come from your internal existing streams or they're from something you just want to write yourself. So I think I'm just rephrasing your SDK kind of comment, but it makes a
Yeah.
ton of sense to say, like, look, I'll give you one. We were just talking, really just a few hours ago at the office, I was talking about this, which is, we have a demo form on our website, and it's,
Yeah.
it's a okay software, and it can post to things, right? You can kind of generate webhooks for what it's doing, and
Yeah.
the speed at which we can get that webhook through our data kind of process flow is too slow to take action, right? Relative to the person's on the website
Yeah.
trying to book a demo. And so that's exactly a use case
Yeah.
where we're going to want that to go faster through Census, right? I don't think of that
Yeah.
as necessarily rewriting your event collection framework for your website. I think a lot of that is already built out in companies, and we should just leverage what the engineering team's already built. So the idea is to, like, if
Yeah.
you have
That
streams of
makes
events, let's use them. If you don't, let's make it easy for you to connect that with an SDK.
that makes a ton of sense. I kind of wanted to open up to your thoughts on where the industry is going, and what do you think is going to be really relevant. I love what you said about activating data, and we're moving from the age of data teams using it to the age of having more insights in the business being powered by something like sort of data activation. What are some of if you had to make three predictions, and I love that we're sort of nearing the end of 2023, and
Sure.
since this is being recorded, we can review this at the end of 2024, which no one does.
Sure.
But what are three predictions, in this
All
space?
right. It's good. Okay, I haven't thought about my predictions. I'm gonna come up with them on the fly today, and then I'll have to think through them before the end of the year. Um,
Take your
I
time.
think this is a great question. I think the first is I'll say something that I already said, but I do think in the next, not just the next year, but probably it'll take more than a year. Probably you're going to see it evolve over the next 2 to 3 years. But I think where you're going to see real progress in the coming year is all of the major data platforms will start to have solutions around what you and I call, like what I'm calling low latency. So you can call it real time, you can call
Yeah,
it streaming, you can call it whatever you want. Uh, but that is only going to get uh, better, and it's going to be something that they use against each other to kind of demonstrate that they're able to do more scenarios. And I think it's natural why, right? Because they've already done so much to compete on, let's call it traditional OLAP, slow kind of data warehousing, that it's just the next frontier, right? Is to take all of that, but also let me work fast, especially since I think, again, this may be a second prediction, is we're going to see more progress on this idea that data infrastructure is not just for the data team. It's actually business infrastructure. It's a back end for your company. It's a back office.
yeah,
And I think that's necessary because of what people are spending on this infrastructure. And at some point, whether it's CMO, CIO, CFO, CTO, right? You're going to need to use this for more. And I think those companies want that,
yeah,
right? There's a reason if you look at Snowflake and Databricks, they're spending a lot of very clear dollars, whether they're marketing dollars, venture dollars, corporate development dollars at getting data in faster. Databricks just bought Arceon, right? Which is very much a streaming ETL service, right? To get data into Databricks faster. And
yeah,
they are working on enabling use cases outside of, let's call it, just data for data's sake. So this is the CDP scenario is one of them, but I think you're seeing it in security tooling. They're just trying to find any use case outside of just data for data's sake to justify kind of
yeah,
why this is the platform on which you're going to run everything. And you understand why from their perspective, because they make money on compute. So they want more compute, workflows on their system. And then the third prediction is a really boring one, Tarush, but it's like it is still 2023. But obviously, AI is going to get bigger. So, okay, that's a boring prediction to make. So let me see if I can make something more specific. I think, I think the thing that we'll see is there's going to be two things that have to evolve in tandem to make AI work better. One is the easy one that is kind of outside of my core wheelhouse at Census, which is there's just going to be a lot more unstructured data. So I think the rise of LLMs, their biggest superpower is they they free you from necessarily having to create structure over your data. And I think if you look at
yeah,
Snowflake's most recent numbers, overwhelming growth is in unstructured data this year. I think like structured data quantity went up only a little bit, and unstructured went up like 17x. And I think
mm,
I think this is going to be where even like you're going to see the MongoDBs or something try to come in from the other side going, we're already the giant store of random documents. And now you can run AI workflows on top of that because it doesn't need structure. It can just run on unstructured data. Think of it as like a search algorithm. And so I think that is going to reshape things a little bit. It's going to, suddenly you might wonder, do I really need to have all this really in-depth modeling? So I think that's going to be like a kind of out of left field kind of make some waves against the structured data. But I do think, listen, if you want to enable AI at some level, you have to, the thing that it requires is you want as much trust in your data as you can. And so I think the value that you can create in having clear models that you vend out to the rest of your company, that you can say these ones are true, these ones are good. And the more you have AI technology in your company, the more you're going to be on the line to make sure that data is true, because the more workflows are going to be running on top of that data. So I think there might be an
Yeah.
increase in kind of data validation and data testing, those kinds of things, as people run AI on it. And so Census, I think, plays a role in that. I tried to make sure my predictions were not just Census related, but I think
Yeah.
the data space is definitely not immune, and hopefully can lean into it.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing your
I had
three
not thought of these
predictions.
before. This is very much now I'm going to think about it for the rest of the week. I need to probably post some kind of prediction thing at some point.
uh,
What are your
I
predictions?
wanted so um, that's a great question. I think this is something I think about
Do
a
you have
lot.
predictions,
I
Tarush?
think we are going to see consolidation in this space, whether it's end-to-end platforms like 5x who help you manage it, or some level of acquisition. So I think consolidation is coming. I think we're going to see a lot more FinOps. Um,
Mm,
all of a sudden, the unlimited access to data teams, because your VCs love it, is no longer a thing, and companies are getting way more cost conscious. Um, and I think that's gonna, I think FinOps, we're just gonna enter it. Initially there'll be tools around FinOps on optimizing your cost. It's gonna help in some levels of consolidation, but eventually, warehouse compute on average is a multiple more expensive than doing compute yourself, right? There's this,
yeah,
and with all the advancements we have now in flat file sort of storage and compute layers on top, like, is this the beginning of the end of warehouses as we know it, because companies can go run a compute layer on top? So I think
yeah.
that's very, very, very
I think that's a good one. By the way,
early.
my take on that, if I could get to put a fourth, is I think there's going
Please,
to be an
yeah.
increase on compute on the edge. Uh, it is absolutely wild when you think about the computer that's running in front of me and what it can do.
Yeah,
Whether I think, and I
like
think
for
there's like two
sure.
trends at the same
EV,
time, right? There's the kind of LLM side where you can put an LLM on your phone, you can put an LLM on your computer, and there's the DuckDB side, right? Where why not just run 80% of that query on my machine? Uh,
yeah,
where I think
exactly.
below a certain range, it actually makes a ton of sense. There's so much wasted, just idle compute on our computers, and they're really good, right? A modern
Yeah,
MacBook is an unbelievable machine. Uh, Even the
exactly.
sub $1,000 MacBook is wildly powerful, and parallel.
Yeah, yeah. It's the first time in the last few years. Today I use a MacBook Air, right? Like,
Hmm.
sort of, 10 years ago, I would not want to ever be seen without like the
Right.
MacBook Pro and all of this. But like, the $1,000 Mac is like a piece of art. And I fully agree with what you're saying, right? And it kind of is all the beginning of like the FinOps conversations, right?
Yeah,
How do
I
you
think it's connected to
really,
it for
really,
sure.
really optimize?
Yeah, it's
And then I think
I
my
think
third
what's missing.
prediction
Yeah,
would,
go ahead. Give me your third. Yeah, no, go for it.
I think my third prediction would be, I kind of want to say something around around conversational BI,
Mm,
and I think it's got a lot of potential. Your traditional, dashboarding way, but again, I don't think, to be honest, we're going to see this inside 2024. I think this is going to be a sort of 2025 phenomenon. I think my third prediction for sort of 2024 is, I think like the years, I think, and again, this is sort of, this is not just for all our listeners, this is not just because I'm speaking with Boris, but I really think like, this is going to be in some ways a rise of like the data activation year. Like, companies have invested all this infrastructure, and sort of data activation or reverse ETL really allows you to action it. And it was interesting because I was talking to Taylor from like Fivetran, and
mm,
obviously
sure.
Fivetran is extremely well known, and
Yeah.
very, very well adopted. And he was mentioning that they've just recently got into true enterprise, right? Like
Yep, that's true.
true, big,
Absolutely.
massive
Yep.
enterprise. I think they're
Fivetran
just starting to
was
adopt it.
built on small and medium business almost exclusively.
Yeah, and so it takes, even when you think a sort of category is like it's become pretty mainstream. It actually takes years after that for it to really, really gain enterprise adoption. So we're just starting to see that now. I think although in the VC sphere and in the data practitioner sphere, sort of data activation might have been a 2 or 3 year old sort
Mm-hmm.
of new phenomenon. I think in terms of mass market adoption, I think we're I think post ingestion storage modeling reporting, I think we're going to see adoption of this as a next mass market adoption product.
I think one of the biggest advantages and disadvantages of working in Silicon Valley is that you overestimate what has been deployed in the world. And you think that what was invented a week ago is already everywhere. And nothing could be further from the truth, right? The when we started the company, Tarush, like 5 years ago, I remember telling a friend, "Oh, here's what we built. You know, the prototype that we built, and that Figma was going to use it." And he thought this was already a solved problem. He just assumed this was already fully solved, and that Figma already like the idea that this wasn't solved yet was hard for them to think of. And I
Yeah,
think it's yeah, Fivetran's been talking about the ELT paradigm for so many years. I was there when Fivetran started, and that was 11 years ago almost, right? So it was January 2013. So they're going to have their 11th birthday.
yeah,
And you know, just now, like you said, just now they're getting into the real enterprise market. And they had so much growth for so many years in kind of the long tail that no one was paying attention to because it was so easy to use and so easy to deploy. And the traditional
yeah.
enterprise ETL vendors were not touching that world. And so I think that's what's so exciting for you as well for 5x, like not to play the game here in reverse, but I think one of the things you talk about consolidation, right? And I don't think anyone wants to buy Informatica as a small business. Obviously, they don't want you either. But I do think the modern data stack is a lot of tools. It's a lot of things you got to put together. And there's a scale of business for which that's just too much work, right? Because you don't have a human that you can hire that knows it all and that you can trust to buy and combine it all. But you want to get
Yeah.
on that track. You want to get on those rails. And there's very much one of our oldest blog posts at Census was trying to talk about when do you upgrade from your V1, you're a startup, you get 3 tools and you just leave it at that. You don't overdo it, you just have 3 tools, so who cares, you just kind of connect them and leave it at that, to now you need the modern data stack. And I think the key is that it's inevitable. You want to be on this kind of data model. Independent of the substrate, you want to be on this model. And so I think the more you can get
Yeah.
smaller, long tail businesses on this, the better it is for them as they grow. Because otherwise, someday they're going to hire someone and they're going to be like, "You're not on the thing." Well, I'm going to have to redo everything from scratch as a step one. And as an executive, I hate that. I absolutely hate the let's reboot and rewrite our models in this new way. Like, it's just terrible. And so if you can get them
Especially in
on the
data,
right
right?
rails,
Because
exactly.
yeah, especially in data, because I think the migration costs in data are, you know, I think data is probably an industry where you have the highest migration cost, right? You can't tell the business, hey, for 2 months we're not going to have reporting because we're rebuilding everything from scratch. Come back 2 months later.
Also,
Is
how do
how
you
do
explain
you?
the value of that rebuild? How do you explain it, right? You have to show value much faster in our day and age. Now, enterprises can operate on those kinds of multi-year transitions, but the average business, you can't just say, well, we're doing a data warehouse migration for the next 3 months. And what's the output? Well,
Yeah,
at the end, it'll be the same. But I'll be a lot more flexible because I'll be using DBT and all these things, all of which you want.
yeah.
But if you can get them on that path with no compromise, right? Earlier, I think that's a huge benefit to both the customer and to the industry. So I'm very excited about 5x.
Thank you. And we are super excited to partner together. We are sort of Census just went live on the 5x platform. We are about to publish a blog of why we decided to partner with Census. So a lot more of that will be linked with the show notes below. I know we're just out of time, and I love asking some rapid fire
Go for it.
questions. And
Let's do it.
I think there are two questions in particular which I wanted to ask you. Number one is, what are you most excited for in Census in 2024?
I'm gonna say streaming. Just the ability. It's been such a blocker for so many years. The fact that we can stream now is just so exciting, and that's launching in January in a big way. So I'm just very excited.
Amazing. And what is one vendor in the data space which you think is highly overrated, and one
Ooh.
vendor who you think is highly underrated?
Oh boy. All right. Well, I think overrated. I think the only answer I can give, and I say this out of love, is DBT. Not because I don't love the technology. I just think it actually it has scoped people's thinking too much. And I'm an engineer. I went to school for computer science and graduate school for computer science, and I actually think one of the most fun things in computer science is studying programming languages and the ability to use different ones. And I think
Yeah,
the data community is overly myopic in this way, and so it'd be cool for them to realize that it's a journey as you become an analytics engineer. That there are other ways to think about that. And so it's more as a nerd. It's like I don't want people to stop thinking about how should we express data
yeah, I think
and programming
it's
around it.
valid.
And then underrated. That's a good one. I mean, I might go with Materialize. I think it's a very cool kind of streaming data warehouse, and it kind of it did a good job of saying let's build it that way from scratch rather than graft it on. And so I think a lot of times when you see Snowflake and Databricks add those features that are kind of clunky, and what Material has
Yeah,
done is pretty cool because it really is streams all the way through. So it's more expensive, but it's if you've ever played with that technology like Kafka and stuff, it is actually a complex nightmare. And so the fact that you can
yeah,
give people a traditional SQL experience, but everything underneath has kind of this like streaming guarantee, it's pretty cool. So there you go.
yeah. Awesome. There you have it, Boris. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for
I'm
having me.
sure our listeners will really, really appreciate some of the insights, and it was really good to connect.
Likewise, man. All right. Well, have a great time, and then I'll see you when I see you.